On the morning of January 11th, 2013, students began arriving at Lowndes High School expecting a normal day. The halls slowly filled with the sounds that every high school shares. Lockers closing, conversations between friends, and a distant echo of footsteps in gym corridors. Nothing about that morning suggested it would become the beginning of one of the most controversial and debated death investigations in modern American true crime. Yet inside the school's old gymnasium, something had already gone terribly wrong. Against one wall of the gym stood several large rolled wrestling mats. These mats were thick, heavy, and stored vertically when not in use. Students who practice sports sometimes place shoes or small items inside the hollow center openings of the mats because they were easy to reach and the gym lockers were limited. It was a common habit among students, something that had likely happened many times before without anyone thinking much about it. But on that morning, one student walked near the mats and noticed something unusual. At first, it looked like a pair of sneakers sticking out from the top of one of the roll mats. That might not have been strange on its own, except that the shoes seemed attached to something. When someone looked closer, they realized those shoes were on someone's feet. And inside that mat was a body. The body belonged to 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson. The discovery immediately sent shockwaves through the school and through the city of Valdosta. Emergency responders were called, and soon investigators were examining the strange and unsettling scene. Kendrick's body was positioned upside down inside the roll mat. His feet were visible near the opening at the top, while the rest of his body extended deep into the narrow space. It was an unusual position that immediately raised questions about how someone could end up like that in the first place. Before that moment, Kendrick Johnson had been known simply as a teenager with friends, family, and plans for the future. He played sports, attended school like thousands of other students across the country, and spent time with classmates who described him as friendly and athletic. Teachers remembered him as respectful and easygoing. His parents, Kenneth and Jacqueline Johnson, saw him as a young man with a future ahead of him, someone who still had many years of life left to experience. The day before his body was found, January 10th, had seemed like any other school day. Security cameras inside the school showed Kendrick walking through the hallways during the afternoon. Students were moving between classes and sports activities. At some point, Kendrick was seen heading toward the gym area. According to investigators and students who knew him, Kendrick had kept a pair of athletic shoes inside one of the rolled wrestling mats. Many students had done the same thing, because the mats were hollow in the middle. The theory investigators would later present suggested that Kendrick may have gone to the gym to retrieve those shoes. What they believe happened next is what eventually became the official explanation for his death. According to investigators, Kendrick may have climbed onto the mat and leaned inside to reach the shoes. The mats were tightly rolled, creating a narrow tunnel-like space in the center. If someone leaned too far inside, it might have been possible to slip. The official theory suggests that Kendrick may have fallen headfirst into the mat while trying to reach his shoes and was unable to pull himself back out. The space inside the mat was extremely tight, and if someone were stuck upside down, it could become very difficult to move or breathe normally. Investigators later concluded that Kendrick likely died from positional asphyxia, a condition in which a person's body position prevents them from breathing effectively. According to that explanation, the unusual position of Kendrick's body may have gradually restricted his ability to breathe until he eventually lost consciousness. For investigators examining the physical evidence at the scene, this theory appeared to fit the circumstances. There were no immediate signs of a struggle inside the gym, and the way Kendrick's body was positioned seemed consistent with the possibility of someone falling into the mat. The official investigation conducted with the involvement of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation eventually ruled Kendrick Johnson's death an accident. But while investigators believed they had found the explanation, the case was far from over. Kendrick's family had immediate doubts about the conclusion. From their perspective, the explanation did not fully answer the many questions surrounding the situation. Kendrick had been a strong and athletic teenager. His parents wondered how he could have become trapped in such a way that he could not escape or call for help. They questioned why no one heard anything inside a busy school gym. They also questioned whether the investigation had examined every possible detail. As news of the case began spreading beyond Valdosta, people across the country started learning about the unusual circumstances of Kendrick's death. Discussions began appearing on social media and online forums. Many people found the case confusing and unsettling. The image of a teenager discovered upside down inside a wrestling mat seemed so unusual that it naturally sparked curiosity and debate. One of the most discussed elements of the case involved the school surveillance cameras. Lowndes High School had security cameras installed in various hallways and common areas. Investigators reviewed hours of footage to determine Kendrick's movements on January 10th. Some cameras showed him walking through hallways and heading toward the gym. However, the exact moment when he entered the specific area with the mats was not clearly captured on video. Some portions of the footage also appeared to skip ahead in time. Investigators later explained that the recording system used motion-activated cameras rather than continuous recording. That meant the cameras only captured clips when movement triggered them. Still, the gaps in the footage left some people feeling that important moments might not have been documented. In cases where video evidence is incomplete, speculation often grows quickly. As the story spread across the country, Kendrick Johnson's family continued pushing for more answers. They wanted additional investigation and independent reviews of the evidence. Their determination led to a second autopsy performed by a private pathologist. That examination produced a different interpretation of some findings and suggested the possibility of blunt force trauma. The conflicting medical conclusions deepened the public debate about what might have happened. Supporters of the family believed the second autopsy raised serious concerns that deserved further investigation. Authorities, however, maintained that the original findings still supported the accidental death conclusion. Over time, the case drew national attention and became one of the most widely discussed controversial death investigations in the United States. Demonstrations and public calls for answers took place in different cities. Many people followed every new development closely, hoping that some piece of evidence would provide a clearer picture of the events that led to Kendrick's death. Multiple reviews of the case were eventually conducted, and the situation attracted the attention of federal investigators. The Federal Bureau of Investigation examined aspects of the evidence as the case continued to generate questions and debate. Despite these additional reviews, authorities repeatedly stated that there was no conclusive evidence showing that Kendrick Johnson's death resulted from foul play. The official ruling of accidental death remained in place. But even with those conclusions, the controversy surrounding the case never fully disappeared. Years later, discussions about Kendrick Johnson's death still appear in documentaries, online videos, and true crime forums. Some people believe the official explanation is the most logical interpretation of the physical evidence available. Others believe that the unusual circumstances and unanswered questions mean the full story may still not be completely understood. What makes this case particularly memorable is how a single moment inside a quiet high school gym created a mystery that continues to divide opinion even more than a decade later. For Kendrick Johnson's family, the case has always been deeply personal. They continue to remember their son not as a headline or a debate topic, but as a young man whose life ended far too soon. To them, the search for answers has never truly ended. And for many people who follow the case, the story remains both tragic and puzzling. A teenager walks into his school gym one afternoon, and by the next morning he is discovered in a position so unusual that it sparks a nationwide conversation about what might have happened. The official ruling says it was a tragic accident, But the questions raised by the case continue to circulate years later, reminding people that some stories never fully fade from public memory. Cases like this often stay alive not because of clear conclusions, but because of the uncertainty that surrounds them. And sometimes, the mysteries that linger the longest are the ones that people continue discussing for generations. If you have a theory about what might have happened in the Kendrick Johnson case, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore more stories that continue to raise questions years later, subscribe to Unsolved Case Files, because some cases may be officially closed, but the conversations surrounding them are far from over. As investigators continued examining the scene inside the gymnasium at Lowndes High School, more details slowly began to emerge about the final hours of Kendrick Johnson. What initially appeared to be a strange and tragic discovery soon became the center of intense scrutiny. Students who had been at school the previous afternoon began sharing what they remembered about the day Kendrick was last seen. Several recalled seeing him walking through the halls like he normally did. Nothing about his behavior stood out as unusual. He had attended classes, spoken to friends, and moved between areas of the school just like every other student that day. For most people who interacted with him, it was an ordinary afternoon that ended without any sign that something had gone wrong. Investigators reviewing the school security footage were able to piece together parts of Kendrick's movements during the day. Cameras captured him walking through hallways and eventually heading toward the gym area. After that moment, however, the visual record became less clear. Some parts of the gym were not fully covered by cameras, and the system used at the school recorded clips when motion was detected rather than continuous video. Because of that, there were gaps in the timeline. Investigators believe Kendrick likely entered the gym area sometime after classes ended, possibly intending to retrieve the pair of athletic shoes he had been storing inside one of the rolled wrestling mats. Those mats were large and heavy, often standing upright against the wall when not in use. Each mat was tightly rolled, leaving a narrow hollow space running through the center. Students had developed a habit of placing shoes inside those openings because they were easy to reach during sports practice. Investigators later determined that Kendrick's own shoes were located near the bottom of the mat where his body was discovered. This detail became one of the key pieces supporting the theory that he had been trying to retrieve them. According to the official reconstruction of events, Kendrick may have climbed onto the mat and leaned forward to reach inside. Because the opening was narrow and deep, retrieving items sometimes required leaning far into the roll. If someone lost their balance while doing that, it might have been possible to slip headfirst into the mat. Once inside, the tight walls of the roll padding could make movement extremely difficult. Investigators believe that Kendrick may have become trapped upside down in that position, unable to pull himself free. Positional asphyxia, the condition cited in the official ruling, occurs when a person's body position restricts their ability to breathe normally. Being inverted for an extended period of time can cause pressure on the chest and diaphragm, making it harder for the lungs to expand. Investigators believe that if Kendrick had remained trapped in that position long enough, the lack of proper airflow could eventually have caused him to lose consciousness. Despite that explanation, the unusual circumstances immediately raised questions among those who heard about the case. Many people wondered whether a healthy teenager could truly become stuck in such a way without being able to free himself. The mat itself was heavy, weighing hundreds of pounds when fully rolled. Some speculated that moving it from the inside would have been extremely difficult. As the investigation continued, Kendrick's parents began asking questions of their own. To them, the explanation did not seem to fully account for everything that had happened. They questioned how their son could have fallen into the mat without anyone nearby noticing or hearing him call for help. They also wondered why certain parts of the school surveillance footage appeared incomplete. Their concerns soon became public, as the case began attracting media attention. News reports described the unusual discovery and the debate surrounding the investigation. Within weeks, the story had spread across the country. Many people following the case online began discussing possible explanations, examining the available details, and trying to understand what might have happened inside the gym that afternoon. At the same time, investigators continued analyzing the physical evidence. The original autopsy conducted by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation concluded that Kendrick's death was consistent with accidental positional asphyxia. According to that report, there were no clear signs that another person had been involved. However, Kendrick's family was not satisfied with that conclusion. They arranged for a second independent autopsy, hoping it might provide additional clarity. The findings from that examination differed in certain interpretations, raising the possibility that Kendrick may have suffered blunt force trauma. Those conflicting conclusions intensified the public debate surrounding the case. As discussion spread, the story began gaining national attention. Supporters of the Johnson family organized demonstrations and public events calling for further investigation. Social media platforms filled with posts discussing the case, with many people expressing belief that more questions needed to be answered. The controversy surrounding the case eventually led to additional reviews by various agencies. Federal authorities, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, examined elements of the investigation. Over time, multiple reviews concluded that there was no evidence sufficient to change the original ruling of accidental death. Despite those findings, public debate continued. Part of the reason the case remained so widely discussed was the unusual nature of the discovery itself. The image of a teenager found upside down inside a gym mat was so unexpected that it naturally invited speculation. People tried to imagine how the situation could have unfolded, and many found it difficult to visualize the sequence of events. Another factor that fueled ongoing discussion was the incomplete nature of the available video evidence. Because the cameras did not capture every moment inside the gym, the exact sequence of events leading to Kendrick's death was never recorded in full. That lack of a clear visual record allowed different interpretations to emerge. For Kendrick Johnson's family, the case has always been about more than speculation or online debate. It represents the loss of a son, a brother, and a young man whose life ended far too soon. Over the years, they have continued advocating for further examination of the circumstances surrounding his death. Even more than a decade later, the case still appears in documentaries, podcasts, and online discussions about unresolved mysteries. Some people believe the official explanation is the most logical conclusion based on the evidence available. Others feel that certain details remain unclear, and that questions still linger. What makes this case stand out among many true crime stories is the way it continues to divide opinion long after the initial investigation ended. In some cases, time gradually brings clarity. In others, it simply deepens a mystery. The story of Kendrick Johnson remains one of those cases that people continue to revisit, try and understand how an ordinary school day could end with such a tragic discovery. Whether viewed as a heartbreaking accident or a case that still leaves unanswered questions, it remains one of the most widely discussed controversial death investigations in modern American history. And even today, years after that morning when students first noticed a shoe sticking out of a wrestling mat, the same question still echoes through every discussion of the case. What really happened inside that gym? If you have a theory about the Kendrick Johnson case, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore more stories that continue to raise questions years later, subscribe to Unsolved Case Files, because some cases may officially be closed, but the conversations surrounding them never truly end.